All right. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. It's Wednesday afternoon, January 10th, and we're here to hear a presentation of some language that the Treasurer's Office is presenting to our colleagues across the hall for the Budget Adjustment Act. So, Gavin, welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you could introduce yourself for the record and tell us all about it.
Sure thing. And thank you for having me, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Gavin Boyles, Deputy Treasurer. Extend my apologies from Treasurer Pichak that he couldn't be here himself. So we have a number of things that are in the BAA. Most of them are pretty ministerial sort of cleanup items, but a couple of them have some details that are worth understanding and going through. So I wanted to start with a program that I think you're all familiar with, which is Vermont Saves, which is the automatic enrollment IRA retirement savings program that was enacted last year and that we're working on operationalizing now. So a couple quite small fixes there that I'll mention first. One is just changing the term salary to the term wages, which is more inclusive and captures more things like hourly wages, for example. So that was just a cleanup item. There is an enforcement provision in the statute, which we, in talking with some other states, realized that it should be phrased more clearly to apply to employers that sign up, but then don't take any further action, that we should be able to follow up with those employers and ensure that they're actually implementing the program. So those are the two minor things. The more sort of substantive piece, you may recall that the program was originally designed to be implemented in phases. And a piece of feedback that we had gotten from the chamber and some others was that the phases were potentially confusing. And in speaking more, because the phases were divided by employer size. And so there was this question of, well, if you're an employer and you have 5 people sometimes and 6 people some other times, then, when do you have to enroll? So we spoke with a number of other states. We spoke with our likely vendor who would be implementing the IT side of this. And they said because of Vermont's small size, we could very likely just roll the whole program out all at once, which obviously is much simpler. We think it means that we can do the whole thing faster. So what we're asking for there is just essentially empowering us to do it faster if we can, and we certainly intend to. It still has the same ultimate backstop of we have to implement it by, I think it's July 1, 2026, but we aim to do it faster. We have our executive director on board. We apologize for hiring her away from you folks, but she is excellent, and we're feeling good about that. The next piece I'll mention is the teachers' COLA. So there are a number of kind of historical cleanup issues, I'll say, there related to the COLA. Some of you are probably aware there are multiple groups within each of the retirement systems. So each of those groups has potentially different rules about what they get in retirement and how the COLAs work. This is no exception. So there are sort of the 3 primary groups within VSTRS, the teachers' retirement system. In a 2016 statutory change, there was an inadvertent change to the cap on the COLA in high inflation years. That provision never was relevant. It never became operational from 2017 to 2022 because inflation was always low. And of course, as you all know, inflation in 2022 was extremely high. It was 7.6% at the time that we measured it for this purpose. So that provision came into play for the first time. And the result of it was that although many teachers under the prior law, under the pre-2016 law, would have gotten a 3.8% COLA, they got a 2.5% instead. There was a fix for that one-time piece last year to the tune of, I think it was $2.3 or $2.4 million. The legislature also set aside a forward-looking funds sufficient to fix it looking forward, $9.1 million, but also asked us to study the question of whether that 9.1 was the exactly right number. We're always gaining more information about experience and costs of running the system. So we have now done that work. The number is actually 9.5 million, but quite close to the 9.1. The intention there is, is simply to go back to the pre-2016 system. There's a tremendous amount of detail about this and about the history that we looked into in the report that's in your materials. And I'm happy to go into it further. And we have Stephen Berry from our retirement division staff here who can do that as well. But, the intention, and we've worked very closely with VSEA throughout on this. So that is that. There are two other fixes that we discovered in kind of going back through those COLA provisions for the teachers system. And those relate to the floor. So in low inflation years, there are essentially protections built in. And in 2016, it appears to us that there was, through an inadvertent change, the result would have been that there could be a negative COLA for members of Group C, which is actually the largest group in the teachers system. So it did not appear that that was the legislature's intention. There was no discussion of it in any fiscal notes or anything like that. So we'd like to change that. There's also what is called Legacy Group C, which is kind of an older closed group in the teachers system. They had always had a minimum 1% COLA pre-2016, and that, again, seemingly inadvertently didn't carry through. So we reinstate that. And then there's one other group, Group A, which, again, inadvertently what seems to have switched in 2016 to sort of having an ambiguous COLA. And the intention here is to switch back to what it was before, which is that if the CPI is below 1%, for that group only, it rounds down to zero, and there's no COLA in that circumstance. And again, that was the system pre-2016. There was no discussion of changing it in 2016. It just was changed in the ultimate statutory language.
Just clarify that the practice in those low inflation situations, we're fixing the language, but it's not as if there's been that situation and any group actually had their COLA calculated as negative. It's that we're fixing the formula now. I just wanted to be really
That's right.
clear on that. Okay.
So thank you for that clarification. But it is, clearly something we want to avoid.
We would like the language to be clear.
Yes. And that's, I think that's a great point. I mean, that clarity, we have a small retirement division. They get phone calls from someone in any, number of groups about any aspect of their retirement. And so to the extent we can have clarity, we are able to give better, more timely advice to folks. And, and this is it's a very consequential conversation that they're having with us. So we want to be able to do that as well as we can. So again, lots more detail in the report. One last thing I'll mention, for early retirees, this was another seemingly inadvertent change in 2016. The system has always been that if someone retires early, they don't get a COLA until they reach the normal retirement age. So this is, again, just returning to that clear language, reinserting that clear language in the statute. So there's a report on this whole issue on all the dollars from our actuaries. There's statutory language that we've provided as well in the materials. So happy to take any questions on that. And then we've got a few other sort of more minor things that I'll mention too.
Before Gavin moves on, so are there any questions about the COLA? Representative Higgins got his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Boyles. I haven't had an opportunity to look over the information that you sent, but I think it's my understanding that back in 2016 that that CPI issue was a negotiated contractual issue. Am I not correct?
Which CPI issue do you mean? The cap specifically?
Yes.
The 5%? I might look to Ashlyn Doyon, who's here. I don't know the answer to that.
Sure.
I guess my question is, I believe that if that was negotiated, then it's a negotiation issue again. I don't see how we can make unilateral change in that.
Yeah, and I don't believe that we've heard that from VSEA specifically, who's in the room here.
You mean
So-
the NEA?
Sorry, the NEA. I apologize.
I think maybe take a step back.
Yeah.
And this is part of why I asked the previous question, Gavin. So what we're doing here is attempting to have the statutory language reflect the actual intended practice. Mark, I don't know if Representative Higley, I don't know if you'll remember, but last year when it was discovered that we were in this unusual situation where the half of the inflationary amount, was made a 3.8% COLA. It was bigger than we had really anticipated because of these, a year or two of very high inflation. That we looked at the language that had been adopted in 2016, and it actually it wasn't clear in the way it captured the deal that was negotiated. And that negotiation, as I understood it, and talking to the former chair of this committee a couple chairs ago, Representative Sweeney, the language around the floors that we're tweaking here, if I understand you correctly, Gavin, we're really just trying to make it clear what that is. Because if you look at that language from 2016 and you try to figure out for each group what the floor is in a low inflationary year, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I read it over and over and over again last year, and I talked to multiple people, and it was not clear. So I think all we're trying to do is just clean up the language, not actually change the rates or change what was negotiated, so that if we ever get to a super low inflation situation, that the statute actually represents the intent to have a floor of either 1% or 0, depending on what the group is. Is that fair, Gavin?
I think that's right. Yeah. As to the floor, were you asking Representative Higley about the floor or the ceiling? I apologize if I wasn't answering your question very direct.
Well, it'd be that ceiling, I believe, and I maybe, it's a while ago. I don't recollect for sure, but again, it always concerns me when it seems like, this is a negotiated issue. Everybody's happy until something changes. And now this has changed. And what is this, 3.8% to a 2.5% mean in money? What does it mean?
Right. Well, so it's more 2.5% to 3.8%. The way the retirement division had to apply the statute was to give the 2.5 because that's the way it was written. And our understanding is the intention was that it would have been the 3.8, and that's what this funding is for, to carry forward that.
Well, right, again, but what is that? What is that difference between what you're allowing at the 2.5% and what you're saying it should have been at the 3.8%?
Right. So it was for the 1 year, it was roughly, it was in the mid 2 millions, 2.3 or 2.4 million. And this is all in the report. I apologize if I'm getting the numbers, slightly off. And then to carry that difference forward we've now learned from our actuaries, is 9.5 million.
Yeah. So in the report, if everybody's looking at the document from Gavin, it's page 3 of the report. It's page 10 on the BAA language document under Gavin's name. So that actuarial cost update, retired teacher cost of living adjustment methodology, on the 3rd page of that says report, one-time supplemental payment. So this is what we did last year. This was the one-time payment of $2.8 million, which captured the one really high year, the year that broke the cap essentially. And as I recall reading cap language, you could read it one way and read that it was capped at half of 5%, or you could read it another way and read that it was capped at half of CPI. And of course, I think in 2016, it was hard to imagine a year where there would be more than 5% inflation in the United States of America back in 2016. It just wasn't the focus. So I don't think anybody was reading super carefully to make sure that the cap had been captured at that time. It was the impression that I had when we did this last year. So all parties seem to be in support of, well, we should, recognize that there's been this big inflationary year, and the deal that was made was we would do this one-time payment without rebasing off of that one super inflationary year, but that we set money aside for the following year. And now we're here. It's a year later, and we had put aside 9.1, and Gavin, the BA language, it captures the difference in experience is about $400,000.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that just reflects, more learning by us and our actuaries about the actual experience of running the plan. So it may be that, folks are living slightly longer, any number of things can affect that in a minor way like that.
Ashley, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Ashlyn DeLeon with the Treasurer's Office. The one thing that I would add on the numbers is that for the one-time payment, we actually came in sort of below budget, so to speak. We had $160,000 extra in the $3 million that was appropriated to the Treasurer's Office for the one-time supplemental payment. So our proposal is to retain that extra money in the fund to be used for this purpose. So the amount that you'll see that has to be made up in the BAA is actually closer to $240,000. It's not the full $400,000. So we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit.
So the
9.1 was already set aside last year.
Correct.
I apologize if I wasn't as clear as I could have been on that.
So we set aside the 9.1, that's parked for this purpose this year. The 2.8 payment that was made actually there was some left over from the original appropriation there that's getting applied. So the 9.5 calculation is being bought down about halfway. So the difference between the 9.1 and the 9.5 is we've got 160,000 credit from the previous year to apply to that essentially. Am I understanding that right? Okay.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
guys do a lot of math and then you bring it into this. Numbers all the time.
Here's the treasurer's office.
Yeah. All just really appreciate it.
Plan to continue doing the math. I can just run through a few others I think are relatively quick. We have, as you all know, an unclaimed property division. One of the property types that we haven't yet received in the unclaimed property program is cryptocurrency. We are anticipating that we might, that a holder of cryptocurrency might deem it abandoned at some point and might seek to report it to us. And what we've discussed with many other states, and this is sort of becoming a national practice, we're just looking for language that would essentially require the holder of the cryptocurrency to liquidate it before they give it to us, so that we don't end up holding cryptocurrency directly. Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
What do you mean? Like what scenario are you referring to? Somebody would have crypto stock and then why would they abandon it and somehow give it to us?
Yeah. So in the unclaimed property world, let's say you had just a savings account with dollars in it, and you had no interaction with that banking institution for several years. There are specific provisions in law that at some point that institution should deem the property abandoned, report it to us, and then it comes to us and we try to return it to you. So the same is true of various other forms of property, gift cards, in stores, life insurance policies, things like that, that are unclaimed. And we essentially have a staff that tries to return those things to people. Sometimes we can't, sometimes people can't be found. Sometimes we find their beneficiaries and are interacting with
But
probate
you're
courts.
asking for a lever to sort of acknowledge that dismissal from the person who would be relinquishing that money to the, what do you,
I'm not sure
what were you
I'm
just?
following the question.
What are you asking for on
On the crypto side, yeah. So on the crypto front, let's say someone has a crypto wallet on an exchange and
Right.
there's cryptocurrency in the wallet, and they might have Bitcoin, they might have Dogecoin, they might have whatever else in it, various different cryptocurrencies. If they don't interact with that platform for quite some time, under existing law, that platform should deem their property to be abandoned. And it doesn't then become the property of the exchange. It should escheat to the state. And then we would try to find the owner of it. But we don't have the technical ability to hold every type of cryptocurrency directly. So we're just asking for statutory language that would require that exchange to liquidate the cryptocurrency and give us the cash value of it, which we would then try to return to the owner. Is that clarifying?
Is that a practice that's done with other types of securities and?
Yeah, well, it is done with some, yeah. So I mean, I raised the example of gift cards.
Yes.
Sorry?
Oh, no, I was just saying maybe stock commodity, it's just fascinating, just kind of.
Yeah. So I mean, we try in many different property types not to hold sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of unusual things that fluctuate in value. So among those, like gift cards is an easy example. I mean, we get the value of the gift card. If you had an LL Bean gift card that nobody ever used and has a name, Ashlyn is shaking her head at me. I'm misspeaking. I apologize.
Specifically precluded from our,
I apologize. So, but credits from retail.
right.
Thank you.
Yes, so
Yes.
for example, if, so for example, I had unclaimed property, I had Comcast. It was a credit on a bill. They couldn't just hold it so that I had $15 worth of Comcast services I could cash in at some point. They had to send it to the state as $15 cash for me to claim.
Yeah. Thank you. Apologize for misspeaking. So crypto, particularly important that we not have to hold the crypto directly. This would apply to incorporate a definition from Title 8 from Department of Financial Regulation of virtual currency. So inclusive of all types of virtual currency. And then our last two items, we administer a couple of funds. One is called the Emergency Personnel Survivors Fund, which is a fund that when an emergency personnel member passes away in the line of duty, their family members can apply for a cash benefit from this fund. The amount of that cash benefit has been capped at $50,000 since, I think, for roughly about 20 years. So we're just looking for sort of an inflationary increase to that cap of from $50,000 to $80,000 per incident, per death. And then likewise, the Municipal Equipment Loan Fund, which provides low interest loans to municipalities to replace municipal equipment, whether it's a road grader, fire truck, snowplow. And that one has been at 110,000 for many years, and we are looking to increase it to 150,000.
I'll go to Representative Chase and then I'll get back to you, Representative Higley.
I just wanted to clarify what you said about the death situation for first responders. Is it per incident or per death? Because I know with the town I grew up with, oftentimes volunteer fire was a family unit, and if individuals perished in an incident, would that be per incident? Or
It's per decedent,
Okay,
per individual. Yeah, thank you for that.
thank you.
Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a conversation with the treasurer in regards to this because you may have remembered when we had our first day, I had talked about a bill that I have introduced that would add law enforcement to that survivor's benefit. Currently, there's $160,000 in that survivor's benefit. So that would take care of 3 individuals through currently fire or EMS deaths through on the job in the line of duty. I guess I just have a little bit of a concern where at this point, and the treasurer did say he supports looking into adding law enforcement to this survivor's benefit as well. The last time that this survivor's benefit was claimed was the total amount of $50,000 back in 2016. So I'm glad this doesn't happen very often. But again, I'm just wondering if now's the time to increase that amount where there would only be enough money for 2 individuals, when I would hope there's some consideration for law enforcement being added as well. So again, I guess maybe, and I didn't ask the treasurer specifically about his recommendation going to BAA in regards to this change, but maybe Mr. Boyles, if you could, comment on what your thoughts might be, or maybe get back to the treasurer with holding off on that increase until such time as we know whether or not a bill to take on law enforcement would be added.
I'll absolutely bring that back to him, and I appreciate the comment. I think part of our thinking on this was that in light of the infrequency of claims, that we thought it did make some sense to move forward with the inflationary increase, even sort of pending a determination on adding others to the universe of potential beneficiaries. But we'll have a conversation internally on that and follow up with you, Representative Higley. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And if just one other thing to that fund, and I can't remember where that money comes from. I think it comes from also donations as well, but where does the majority of the funds come from for that?
I believe there have just been a couple of appropriations over the years. I'm not aware of donations. I know they're possible, but I'm not aware of any donations actually coming in.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Hooper.
I'm unfamiliar with the history of this. It seems odd that law enforcement would have been excluded to begin with. Was there a benefit that law enforcement had at the time that this bill was created that are mostly volunteer EMS, fire?
Yeah.
Needed that wasn't needed other ways? And why?
I believe so. I'm not familiar with the details of it. I don't know, Ashlyn, if you have any more background on that.
Sure. The establishment of this fund precedes my time at the treasurer's office. However, knowing what I know about our retirement benefits for like the state police, for example, most law enforcement individuals are as a profession, and there are specific death benefits and also employer-sponsored life insurance benefits that coincide with their employment. I think that the intention of this fund is to provide a monetary benefit specifically because so many of Vermont's EMS and firefighter personnel are on a volunteer basis. That's where this helps to bridge the gap. To Representative Higley's point, at this time, we're not asking for an additional appropriation to this fund in the BAA. Of course, with our fingers crossed, hoping that we never have to make a payment out of this fund and that we never experience the death of one of these individuals. I think that the treasurer, I've spoken to him on this topic, he'd like to proceed with seeking this adjustment in the BAA. I did notice that your bill was introduced and he's asked me to review it and to also follow up with you about a pathway for that and how we can be supported.
So Representative Higley, are you, if we can take a little bit of time before we make our recommendation. Like, we don't need to give a thumbs up on this language today. But if we can take a little bit of time to talk about this and get the information about the history and the context from the treasurer's office, and then we can come back to this before we weigh in on the BAA language, if that's acceptable to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to let folks know, in my conversation with the treasurer, he didn't really have a clear answer as to Representative Hooper's question as to why law enforcement wasn't initially included. The comment was made, maybe it's in regards to the other groups, the two groups, having concerns about there being enough money in that fund. But again, I know there is a federal benefit for all those groups currently. And I appreciate the time to look into this a little bit more, but thank you.
Representative.
And my question was basically because it seems like, particularly in the context of adding another 40% to the benefit or so, that we start to get pretty disproportionate when you're looking at some mostly still volunteers as opposed to professional level that has benefits built into their job. I don't know about municipal police, but when you get up to the sheriffs and state police, there's always something built into their job expectation.
Well, I think, I think we're hearing that it's worth taking more of a look at this, and sounds like we're on a path to do that. I think, one thought that I have, I mean, there hasn't been an appropriation to this fund for some time, and given that there aren't that many claims to it, it might also make sense for us to just look at that. What we haven't ever really engaged in sort of forecasting how many claims there are, and it may be that that's very difficult to do, but I think we'll take this back and take a closer look at history and funding and all this background that you're mentioning, Representative Hooper, as well.
And, frankly, we have more deaths attributed to people standing out in the middle of the road with a sign that says slow down than we do most of these other places.
Well, that covers our BAA language. And
so it sounds like the way I'd like to proceed is that to look at these materials now that we've had them introduced, and if Ashley and Gavin, you can get back with that information we just talked about around the emergency personnel survivor benefit. And then I think we'll try to get back together and weigh in. And not to put you on the spot, Mr. Robinson, would you be willing would you like to testify on the COLA pieces while you're here?
I'm happy to, if that would be useful to the committee.
Yeah, so
it would be extremely brief.
Yeah, so I figured as much, so I just wanted to maybe get you in while you're here, if Gavin and Ashley have done their presentation. And then we'll get this back on. I don't know how fast appropriations is moving. I think they're trying to do a vote on Friday. So we may even take a look at this like first thing Friday after the floor, before we launch into things, and just, if we're okay with all the language, give a thumbs up. But let's see if we can move that fast. And I'll talk with our colleagues across the hall about what's the latest we can give them our blessing on the language. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, Gavin. Thank you, Ashley. All right. So Colin, thanks for being willing to weigh in.
Happy to. So for the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA, good to see you all. Happy New Year. We very much appreciate the treasurer's work on this over the past year, dialing in the numbers per the request of the General Assembly as it relates to how to fix this inadvertent mistake from 2016 and codify the 40-year practice of teachers getting a modest 50% COLA benefit. So we're supportive of the language as presented in the report from the Treasurer's Office, the statutory language, as well as appreciate the work dialing in that delta to the $200,000 figure. So yeah, happy to answer any questions. Happy to provide more commentary if requested.
Representative Higley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'd like to ask the question. My understanding, and I certainly understand that provision that was changed in regards to the CPI and the teachers not being allowed any cost of living increase. So that was changed. That cap, from what I understand too, was in there for a reason. And was it or was it not negotiated?
So, little history. Since 1981, retired teachers have received a 50% COLA benefit, 50% of CPI up to a maximum of 5%. After the 2022 deal, for folks going forward, it's actually a maximum of 4%. Details do matter. And that's how it was since 1981 until 2002. 2002 came around. As you heard from the deputy treasurer, inflation was high, and they said, oh, let's calculate this per statute. And it was realized that language that was adjusted in statute, everybody agreed to in 2016 to protect against deflation for retired teachers, changed the process for the mathematical calculation of side in a way that was unintended. And it hadn't been tested, it hadn't been contemplated. As Chair McCarthy pointed out, retired teacher, former chair Donna Sweeney, who would have been adamantly, I'm sure, supportive of maintaining the status quo. Nobody was aware of this context. And here we are now just codifying and correcting a genuine mistake from 2016. To that point, and to your question, Representative Higley, Siegel, the actuaries that work for our pension systems, all three pension systems, incorporated the pre-2016 analysis of how to calculate the COLA in all the actuarial analysis done from 2016 to 2022, including all the analysis done for the pension task force. They assumed the COLA calculation as done prior to 2016. So this was, nobody was the wiser. The actuaries ran the numbers as everybody assumed it to be. And it wasn't until we were presented with this unique scenario that folks realized the process of how you calculate the math does actually have an impact on it. And it was inadvertent correction that we're here doing now, and appreciate the General Assembly's desire to set aside the sum to make sure it doesn't increase the unfunded liability going forward, which is what the 9.1 and 9.5 will do.
Yeah, so I wanted to maybe try to contextualize what Representative Higley was asking. So Representative Higley, I think if I'm taking your question correctly, was asking, you know, didn't we already negotiate this way back in 2016? And the answer was yes, up until you read the formula as it applies to a situation where you have an inflationary year that's higher than 5% inflation. That never really was negotiated, right? So up to 5%, which in most people's minds at that time was like an inconceivable amount of inflation, right? No one had really thought that through. And so what we negotiated last year with the NEA, between the House and Senate leadership, this committee weighed in on it, was a way to say, okay, to be fair to teachers, this was a big inflationary year. We're going to do a one-time payment. We're going to put some money aside to fix this for the future. And we're not going to include last year's giant inflation year in the rebasing of the calculation because we don't want to have a bad impact on the unfunded liability. So everybody got something. And so we were able to preserve our projections for the fund because we didn't use that really high inflationary year. We made that one-time payment. of less than $3 million last year. Nice, we got a little bit of a credit to use towards this year. And we set the 9.1 million aside. And this language is like the second part of that negotiation about what to do about the super high inflationary year that we all settled on a plan last year. Now we're just operationalizing the second year of the plan. Is that a fair characterization, Scott?
Very accurate and fair characterization.
Does that help, Representative Higley? Because it is really complicated.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I just think it is an additional benefit at this point, regardless of whether last year we understood that and set aside some money. But, with the cost of, education property tax going up as much as 18.5%, this is just one more thing that adds to it, if you ask me. Thank you.
I think my interpretation of this is that the deal that was made back in 2016 left the state and teachers vulnerable to interpretation in a high inflationary environment. And so the deal we came up with last year in order to work through that has the least amount of long-term negative impact on the fund. And it has, a modest expense in the short run in order to make sure that folks that are participating in the V-STR system get made whole. But that was the calculation that was made. And I think that the pressure on the ed fund is de minimis here. We're not talking about any major change in that calculation.
And one final thing I would add, and I think it was a wise decision by the General Assembly as we had conversations about how to address this issue, knowing that there's an experience study coming up, the first 3-year experience study. This is why this reanalysis was done, to make sure that number is right. And that experience study showed that the V-STR system is moving in a good, healthy direction, that actually there have been some experience gains to the system, meaning in a positive way, beneficial to the system. And so I think this is also a good moment and a clear number that's been tuned up, and the board and the treasurer's office clearly are supportive of it as well.
Yeah, we'll relay to everybody. I think we talked about this a little bit first week of the session, but the Joint Pension Oversight Committee got the sneak preview of the experience study from the treasurer's office, and we were pretty pleased with the fact that we're able to continue to expect 7% rate of return and some of the other things that during our deliberations about the big pension deal last biennium, we were concerned that we'd be able to maintain the course and have the fund, over the actuarial plan of paying things down with the additional payments, actually get to 100% by the mid 2030s. And now we're on track, and it appears that the deal we made is working. And this is in the context of all of those hundreds of billions of dollars. This is a small tweak. All right. So I think what we'll do is take a day or two with this language. Does anybody have any other questions for Colin at this point? Great. Thank you for confirming that from your end, this does codify the deal.
Great. Appreciate your time. I'm going to go up to Ways and Means.
Have fun.
Thank you all.
Take care. So does that sound like an okay plan to park this? We'll take a position on it in the next day or two, and I'll find out by the end of the day today what our hard deadline is on thumbs up or a need for a change across the hall.
Great plan, Chair.
Great. All right. Yeah, we've got 168 now, right? Am I crazy?
No, I was talking about this is Thursday.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, so, we're gonna get started with the rest, but we can do it then if we're ready. That's just tomorrow. So,
One break.
Oh, sure. Why don't we just we don't have
Thank you.
to go off live. We're just gonna pause for like 2 minutes.
Thank you.
I feel free to introduce us.
Yes, I would
Yeah.
like to. Committee, these are two
They're both
interns for working with me this year on two different caucuses.
Oh, sorry.
This
Sorry.
is Lauren, who is working on the rural caucus with me, and Jane, who is working with the Republican caucus with me. Welcome to our committee room, government operations and military affairs. And I didn't have a chance to explain to you where you find all of our committee documents.
Oh, man.
You go to the General Assembly website.
Yeah.
The Tango.
And the operations and military affairs. Excuse me, that was on House Party. Senate was below that. You can find our agenda by clicking here. And you can find our committee, our names, our members' names there. And whatever we're working on will be under documents of today's state. So you can see the gentleman who was testifying, these are the documents that we got. And then we're going to this bill right here,
How long?
page 160.
As soon as she sits back in her chair, I want to go ahead and go, unless you want to take a break, and then I can adjourn and we can take a
Thank
break.
you.
But the only thing we have to do between now and the floor is your bill presentation, so I'll defer to you, Representative Cooper.
No less.
Do you want to take a few minutes?
No,
I'm ready to roll, and then we can have a break before 4. That's what I prefer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You're so welcome and welcome to the committee. Let us know if you have any questions or need anything here that Representative Hango can help you with. All right, so we're now switching gears. Our very own Representative Hooper is going to walk us through H 168. So Representative Hooper, take it away.
thank you. For the record, as the chair said, Bob Hoop, Chittenden 18. 168 is a 9-page bill that covers stuff that I've been interested in for a while. More than half of our committee endorsed the bill as sponsors. So a lot of people already know this, but it deals with 3 primary issues. The first is that because the Department of Veteran Affairs does not have, it's our state Department of Veterans Affairs, does not have access to state government's records on who may or may not have veteran status. The first thing the bill does is create a database that is only available to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's not searchable or accessible by the public under the Public Records Act, so it's confidential. And it allows Department of Veterans Affairs to more accurately represent the needs of veterans in the state. The director will speak to that if we take this up on a more serious basis, which I hope we do. Secondly, there is a spot where my impression has been that we do not a lot for the regular veterans that go away, go to war. I use, as an example, come back and help to build Vermont up. So in recognition of that, the veteran's license plate, if somebody should elect to get one, the first one for a veteran that was discharged under any condition other than dishonorable, would get one license plate free and 50% on any subsequent license plate that they have registered vehicle for that they are listed as the owner or owner with somebody else. And then the last piece addresses what we've talked about a lot, which is the military retirement pay section, which this is a complicated and maybe overly complicated progressive tax exemption. As income goes up, the exemption goes down, but it adds to what exists now, which is the first 10,000 of benefit if you're under, or you meet certain guidelines. So the last 4 pages are an example of how those computations would be made for households that enjoy career veterans military pension.
So thanks, Representative Hooper. I am seeing that we have a little bit of our jurisdiction. We've got Department of Motor Vehicles, Transportation, and definitely Ways and Means jurisdiction in here.
Yes, I agree, Mr. Chair. That's a good reason to get it out of here.
I'm very interested to know if you could, with the way you set up the progressive military retirement. So that right now we have a certain amount exempt, just that's a flat amount. It's like and we changed it recently. We increased it recently, if I understand.
First 10,000.
First 10,000
With stipulations.
There's, yeah.
Yes.
And so this goes up to 15,000 and then changes as income goes up.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of the conversation that we've had about the benefits of keeping Vermonters in state, like Guard members and other say, flag officers, is that the lower retirement pay grades get a better benefit, a larger benefit, based upon what their go out the door salary was.
Questions for Representative Hooper? Representative Morgan and then Representative.
It's just a statement, and Representative Hooper and I have talked about it, and I don't know that he's necessarily hard on this position, but we've talked some on it, is the exemption of, you know, do we consider one without stipulation, just throwing a number in there? The first, I would make a number up, $25,000 regardless of income sensitivity, et cetera, as I'm just throwing that, that's just a number. And so that it becomes an iterative thing, but don't put any stipulations on it, on income sensitivity. But that was my 2 cents. You know, I've talked about it, but it's something I throw out there. Because I know in talking with folks in both bodies, there's been reluctance because of the loss of revenue to the state. I believe it's in the $2.5 billion neighborhood if we gave zero taxation on military pensions to everybody that's eligible in Vermont. So I know that there's some people have an appetite to go all the way. Some people say do an iterative appetite or iterative bite, I should say. So that's just something I throw out there as food for thought.
And my conscious sort of deliberation on that is we have about 1,300 retirees in the state. And last year when we were talking about doing the full exemption, I think the number was $4 million. About
3.8-ish.
Oh, it is 3. Okay, so
Yeah.
my apologies. I thought I was, it's probably an old number then.
Yeah.
And that's everything across. the board.
Yeah. And we have 42,000 veterans in the state. So
Could you put a finer point on that? So there are approximately 1,400 retirees receiving a pension, 1,300, but there's 42,000 veterans.
In other words, they never did 20 years plus and got a pension from the military.
Yeah.
That the balance of those folks didn't.
the rest of them are like, you know, some of us here went in for 6 years, 4 years. If you're lucky enough to have your friends and neighbors send you without your acknowledgement, 2 years. I was a draftee. You go, you come back. But the thing that has bothered me about the conversation about the pension thing is the elephant scenario where you can't eat it in one bite. And if you want to get something done, you take a little nibble here, a little nibble there. So, you know, in the last session, we raised an amount. This would sort of continue to do the same thing, and you wouldn't be making major adjustments. You just change a little number in here every now and then. if you wanted to get up higher on the exemption.
Representative Hango and Representative Jason.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments, clarifications maybe. I think it will help the General Assembly as a whole to understand the difference between a veteran and a retiree. A retiree has to have served honorably for at least 20 years. And we're specifically talking in this section about a retiree's pension. So we need to make that clear. It's not for all veterans. Veterans are folks who have served for 6 months or more, or who have at least completed their basic training and started their service. So it gets confusing because people think that we're talking about all 42,000 veterans in the United States, in the state of Vermont, sorry, and we're not. So important distinction there. And that $3.8 million figure that you quoted, I just realized this bill does not address survivors' benefits. Is that correct? It's only military retirement pensions?
Yes.
Okay, so all of the other bills that are currently on the wall in various committees, the tax committees, they deal with military pensions and survivors' benefits. So I might be quoting a number that includes survivors' benefits, which is widows, widowers, and children who are receiving money from the government because their spouse, father, or mother has passed away in the line of duty.
So maybe the 2.5 is just.
It could very well be, and I would have to look for more up-to-date figures on that.
Yeah, and I do want to say for everyone here and the folks back home that the details of any tax policy, if we voted out that we wanted a particular thing from here, would certainly be delved into one more depth upstairs in Ways and Means
Right.
than they would here. Because their understanding of all of this in context and how we think about, good tax policy. I think our desire down here would, of course, be to honor people's service.
And I don't know about, maybe Representative Pango, but like a disability benefit.
That's different.
That's a completely different
Yeah,
component.
that's a different.
Tax status of that,
The VA disabilities you're talking about?
Yeah.
Those are tax exempt, 100% federally and state.
There are also other considerations, if you don't mind me speaking on this subject, there are also other considerations that are on walls and committees about allowing for disabled veterans to receive things like property tax exemptions and things like that. So this is not the only one that's being considered for military folks.
true, this is one that deals with the general population as opposed to the specific small.
Yes, the general population of military
Of veterans.
retirees, not veterans, correct?
No, it deals with veterans too.
Well, this money part,
There is no benefit to deal with in a regular veteran as opposed to a retiree. No regular veteran that just got out with an honorable or general discharge has a benefit. So
their
that
benefits. are
benefit is
more like
zero and it's
TMV
not taxed.
benefits,
Yeah.
right? Which you're dealing with in an earlier part of the bill. One reason I didn't sign on to the bill was because I found it a little bit confusing, particularly the nuances of the tax structure. That was a little more than I could bite off and chew and digest at the time when the bill came out. I will say that we did pass that first $10,000 of military retirement pay exemption from state income tax a couple of years ago. And that also goes against one's Social Security income. So if you wish to take the first $10,000 of your total income and have it be tax exempt from the state income tax purposes point of view, you have to choose whether you're taking your military retirement income currently or your Social Security income as a tax exemption. So that needs to be considered while we're talking about this bill as well. And
But that's mentioned.
yes, section 3 talks about that, but I just wanted to point that out to the committee. Because I think many people are not really familiar with these laws, and I have been looking at them for literally almost 6 years now. So another thing I want to just address is that we'll hear more about this when the director of the Vermont Office of Veterans Affairs comes in. Is that some veterans do not want to be part of a database, but I'm going to let the director speak more of that. I have only heard anecdotally about veterans who do not want to be part of a database. And I know that this happens sometimes even when they choose their medical care. Some veterans are not going to the VA to receive their medical care. So the motivations behind that I can't speak to, so it would be great to have some veterans come in and also some military retirees to speak to us as we move forward with this bill. We move forward with it. So thank you for bringing it up and getting it on the table.
Any other questions, feedback for Representative Hooper? Representative Chase, sorry.
From a technology perspective, it would be feasible to build a database with an on built in.
Yeah.
So that they could be counted and represented by the VA without any unique identifying characteristics that would tie them for privacy reasons if they were. So
And there's specific language in here that exempts this database from.
But if they didn't want to participate in that part, then.
It would be great if you brought that up when the director testifies to us too.
Sure. Representative Moore?
Just to piggyback on that, and quite frankly, and almost, and I get what some people are trying to do by not wanting to be part of it. They have their reasons that are valid to them, and I respect that. But that said, anybody that's a veteran that's been in the military knows, and I used to say this to people, they say, well, it seems like I don't have this right or that right. When I'm on this base, I said, you're right, you don't. You step on through the gates of here, things change. It's in as a resultant thing, I would say, we as veterans all are on a database already.
Sure.
So that is already out. Want it to be or not, just due to the fact that you served, you were at least at the national level, you're in a database. But like Representative Chase said, I believe there is very strict control over that. Doesn't just get released to the world. So I think it exists. I almost think it's going to be just my personal opinion. I could be wrong. I think, and there's, like I said, there are ways that can be done and protect those people that want anonymity.
I think the VA is the third largest database in the country.
Probably so.
Behind tax,
I know that.
healthcare.
Yeah.
Probably behind Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a little bit of time to gather thoughts and do some work before 3 o'clock floor. So I will see you all upstairs. And reminder again that we're back here at 10 o'clock, not the usual 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Or 10, not 9 tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. But I thought I saw that and I was like,
I gotta go talk ethics on the radio. So
Do you want me to call in?
tough question. No, I think it'll be good to do a little bit of talking about the Data Ethics Commission and how we're receiving their report and the draft bills. And if you do get some time, those.
are you at WVMT, the morning drive? Or
DV is not Vermont.
DV.
Yeah, it's Vermont Viewpoint.
You're not on Kurt Wright's show?
We'll go ahead